This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. Minister, under C-41, how long do you expect it to take to approve an application from an organization?
Well, thank you for that question. It's probably a question better addressed to the Minister of Public Safety when he's in front of you, I believe, in the very near future. But I know from having heard him present the bill, both in the House of Commons and at a press conference, that he would like to move expeditiously in order to allow humanitarian groups who are working in Afghanistan to move as quickly as they possibly can.
Yeah, sorry, but it wasn't so much about expeditious isn't a timeline, and I know the minister hasn't. No representative of your government has said this publicly, and these timelines are very important for these organizations. As you alluded to, we're far behind our allies. The Afghanistan Committee made all-party recommendations in June of last year. The Foreign Affairs Committee adopted a motion calling for action in the fall, and we're already at the end of March here. But the question isn't so much about the timeline for passing the legislation. It's once the legislation passes, how long will it take to turn around applications from organizations? We certainly don't want to lose another winter of not being able to have Canadian organizations involved in the humanitarian response.
Again, that's a fair question, Mr. Jennis, certainly a fair question, but it is a question better addressed to the Minister of Public Safety. Again, my understanding is that his intention will be to move as expeditiously as possible with those applications once the law is passed.
Could you or your colleagues work to follow up in writing with the committee, either directly from your department or from public safety, with what the estimated or the desired timelines would be for approving applications?
Again, it falls within his responsibilities. I will allow him to make the engagement and the undertaking.
How broad will the applications be from organizations able to be? So I'm thinking if an organization is making an application to provide assistance, will it have to be for a limited period of time, or will they have kind of a permanent, until revoked authorization to run similar kinds of projects? Will the same authorization potentially apply to multiple organizations working together or on similar projects, or will they be narrowly constrained in terms of organization and amount of time?
Thank you for the question. The point of the law is to allow a sufficient degree of flexibility for humanitarian agencies working on the ground while still protecting our ability to combat terrorism and terrorist financing. So it's critical that we strike a balance. So the law is meant to strike a balance. My understanding is that humanitarian groups will apply to the minister, and so again, probably best a question left to the Minister of Public Safety in terms of how he's going to exercise his discretion. But my understanding of the law is that it is flexible and it will allow for the Minister of Public Safety to make those determinations. In the likely course of events, it will be humanitarian organizations applying with a description of the activities that they want to undertake, and then the exemption will be tailored according to that application.
Okay, so just from the perspective of the criminal code amendments, what you're saying is that the powers that are given to the minister are extremely broad in terms of whether the minister is going to use that discretion to apply broader exemptions without time limits or narrower exceptions with time limits. It's essentially entirely a matter of the discretion of the minister.
That's certainly my understanding.
Okay.
Rob, do you want to add to that?
Sure. So the legislation as drafted, if it gets passed, in 83.031 is to carry out in a specified geographic areas controlled by a terrorist group a specified activity that will be otherwise prohibited. So that's the power to the Minister of Public Safety. There are timelines on that, but his discretion is fairly unbound in that sense.
Sorry, are there limits to the time he can set it for?
There's a requirement to reapply after 5 years?
5 years, okay.
Yes, you can renew the initial time frame for each authorization.
Okay,
a maximum of 5 years, but it can be renewed.
Okay, yeah, so just in the time I have left, why not have legislation that generally says that organizations who are having the appropriate level of oversight are engaged in humanitarian activities that are in particular ways minimizing any payments that go to local authorities. Why not provide that description, that exception on a more general basis, rather than simply having a piece of legislation that empowers the minister to do whatever he or she wants in terms of granting or not granting, giving it to some organizations or not, and that is potentially very, very costly and labor intensive on the part of organizations as well as government? Why not do what our allies have done and provide a more general humanitarian exemption?
Well, again, it's particular to Canada, the way in which we have very tough and anti-terrorist financing laws embedded in the criminal code.
But just to jump in on that, wouldn't the Americans and the British say they have tough laws as well,
Minister to answer the question.
We do still have the fight against terrorist financing, which is important, and so we have to balance between the two, and so we are giving a sufficient degree of flexibility to humanitarian organizations who are very happy with the bill, by the way.
Yeah, but
but still allow us to fight terrorism. Why, if you go in the direction that you have recommended, Mr. Janis, you open the possibility that somebody could try to work around.
But do you think the American and the British rules are inadequate?
I think we have chosen the best set of rules that apply to the Canadian structure.
The implication is that the American and the British aren't serious or don't have serious effective regimes on this. I think there's
no, not at all. It's just they have different structures with much more discretion on the part of their elected officials to act. So their discretion is elsewhere. The Attorney General in the United States is an investigating Attorney General, which I am not. But it's a very different set of systems, and we've tailored the best set for ours.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting. The time is up for Mr. Janis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to add a few things to some of your comments that have already been said. Mr. Minister, thank you for being here, by the way. But Canadian humanitarian agencies have been calling for that legislation for quite some time, and I'm deeply troubled that it took your government this long to introduce C-41. There's millions of Afghans who are in desperate need of food and other supplies, critical supplies. Time is still of the essence. You must have known of the dire straits that Afghan women and children are currently in. And in light of the fact, and this has been asked before, but in light of the fact that, as you say, the minister is going to be here shortly, we're not aware that he's going to be here at least till the end of April. So I'm going to ask you again, do you think... what's your excuse for taking so long to table a relatively straightforward piece of legislation? Don't you talk to the ministers?
Well, again, I'm not at liberty to disclose the kinds of things that one discusses around the cabinet table. That's a matter of cabinet confidence. I think the legal conclusion that's evident in this piece of legislation is that a specific law was needed given the structures that are present in the Canadian system. And as I said, they were brought in by Rob Nicholson, prosecutorial independence. I think they're a good thing. But that means I can't tell prosecutors when to exercise and how to exercise their discretion.
Oh, but what took so long to bring the legislation in?
And so we had to resort to a piece of legislation. The Minister of Public Safety has committed to moving expeditiously once this legislation is passed, and I hope that you will pass this legislation quickly.
But it's been years. So when drafting this legislation, your government would have reviewed what other countries are doing to ensure their humanitarian agencies can deliver aid. And it's been discussed earlier, they did. What other allied country has created a process for humanitarian groups to apply for government approval before delivering the assistance to Afghanistan? Have you not talked to other countries to find out what kind of cooperation could take place there as well?
Well, our officials have been looking at what happens in other countries, but again, and I'll ask them to supplement my answer in a moment, but what I will say is in the Canadian system, with independent criminal investigations, with independent prosecutions, we needed something that didn't rely on a simple carve-out, because I can't direct prosecutors to prosecute or not, and I can't direct the police to investigate or not. And
Well-
if there is a question of interpretation, it will be incumbent on those authorities to exercise that discretion.
A little different twist than a question that's already been asked from the Doctors Without Borders. Joseph Bellevue, their executive director of the Doctors Without Borders, stated that Bill C-41 is, and I quote, unduly restrictive and it should be replaced with a general humanitarian exemption. So I guess I'm wondering, there was a decision made by your government, and I'm wondering why they decided to amend the criminal code rather than to grant a humanitarian exemption.
Well, granting a humanitarian exemption is still an amendment to the criminal code, first of all. Secondly, the fight against terrorism is still important. Quite frankly, if we had done that, certain parliamentarians would probably be angry for us saying we've become soft on terrorism. We can't have that happen either. It is still important that we track terrorist activities, including a government like the Taliban, including other groups around the world. And so this piece of legislation affects a very important balance. The fight against terrorism is still important, but the fight to provide humanitarian aid on the ground is also important, and we have carved out a pretty good exemption between the two using the criminal code.
We in Canadian certainly know that, Mr. Minister, and you've certainly been soft in trying to help the folks in Afghanistan that helped our troops get back here in that area as well. But it's important to note the process for humanitarian agencies to seek this application to provide aid in Afghanistan is not contained within this legislation and will be determined later through regulations. I know you had a discussion with this with my colleague who was here just a few moments ago, but this undoubtedly will result in more delays. So can you confirm that the work being done on drafting these regulations, and you are that work is being done on drafting those regulations, and that you are actively consulting with humanitarian agencies to ensure that the process is efficient and straightforward as it possibly can be? And so therefore, when will these regulations be available?
I would ask Rob Brookfield to add in.
To clarify, the bill does provide for the possibility of regulations, but the power of the Minister of Public Safety to issue authorizations is not restricted to the existence of regulations. So the Minister of Public Safety would have discretion to use that power without the need for regulations in the first place.